and thank you everyone for coming. My name is Charu Tigral. I am the Interim Associate Chancellor as well as the Interim Vice Provost for Diversity, and I am here on the behalf of Provost Poser and wanting to thank you on her behalf for attending the DACA discussion today. I want to welcome you also for the Immigration Task Force, who has worked very closely with Provost Poser over the past year to provide opportunities such as this, to be able to educate our campus and support our community to better be able to support students, staff, and faculty around DACA issues. So this opportunity was actually largely a part of the Immigration Task Force work over the past year, and you will have more opportunities such as this actually tomorrow on the west side of campus, and we'll be sure to give you details before you leave today on where you can attend that. I do want to let you know that this event is being live streamed, so again, for those of you who really sort of fought through the bad weather and rain, thank you for being here. For those of you who are watching live, we just realized that we don't have a mechanism in place for you to submit your questions, and we really do want to encourage you to be thoughtful about the material and the expertise that is about to be shared with you about best practices and support for students, staff, and faculty. So in the meantime, we are going to have the Diversity Office listserv as that mechanism for you to email us to any questions, any follow-up sort of inquiries, questions, suggestions, feedback. Please send them to the Office of Diversity at UIC. We will review those later this evening in time for tomorrow's forum and make sure to respond accordingly or try to at least be very aware of whatever information might be most helpful for you at tomorrow's forum. With that, I do want to take us into just walking through very briefly what we have in store for you today. So our agenda consists of a group of expert panelists from UIC who are going to provide a lot of valuable information in their areas of legal, mental health, and financial effects of DACA. They will discuss best practices, advice, perspectives on how we can best advocate, support our students, staff, patients, faculty, administrators who are challenged with such questions and complexities around this topic. We are really fortunate, and I do want to highlight this because I do think that we are very fortunate to have a student here that is going to provide the student perspective on these challenges and complexities, because I do think, again, at the end of the day, we're all here to support our students and their success. So I do want to thank you for being here. Now I would like to introduce Josephine Volpe, who is the Director of the Office of Advising, Development, and Co-Chair of the Provost Task Force for Immigration Issues. She's going to provide you a short overview of DACA as well as some background information about each of the panelists that are going to be talking with you today. But a bit about Joey before we get started. Joey's assumed many leadership opportunities for critical campus initiatives at UIC during her time here, and she was here since 2001, I think. She served on a number of committees. She's kind of the go-to person, which I shouldn't acknowledge publicly. We don't want that to keep happening. But she's that valuable to us in terms of her expertise, her knowledge, and her sincere approach to working and advocating for students in a very thoughtful, meaningful way. So we're really lucky to have Joey, and she served as a co-chair on this committee and is dedicated, has been dedicated throughout her many roles here to removing barriers for undocumented students in her time at UIC. In her current role, in her spare time, she works to provide professional development to advisors. She administers the campus intervention strategies for struggling students, and she consults on a regular basis with advisors, staff, and faculty to really resolve student issues in a very efficacious way. So thank you, Joey, and she will provide you with more information about what you're about to see, or what you're about to hear.
Thank you, Charu. So I'd like to provide an overview for you of DACA and what DACA is. DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. and which is an executive order that was enacted in 2012 under the Obama administration. It was enacted in response to the Federal DREAM Act legislation not passing. And DACA is a federal program, and it allows certain undocumented immigrants who entered the country before their 16th birthday and before June 2007 to receive a renewable 2-year work permit and exemption from deportation. The DACA was rescinded by the current president on September 5th, 2017, leaving a 1-month open window for renewal for students whose DACA work permit expires in March 2018. Individuals whose DACA expires after March 2018 will be able to retain their work permit until it expires, but they were not able to renew within the 1-month window provided by President Trump. Recent response to the DACA rescission at the federal level and responses are a range of bills that have been introduced in Congress. So this is to provide you with a framework of what DACA is. Many of us are very familiar with it, but some of us may not be as familiar with it. This is really a way for us to be able to frame why one of the reasons we're here today. And our panelists are here as experts for you. So without further ado, this is my most important job today, in addition to just providing that overview, and that is to introduce our first panelist. Our first panelist is Dr. Dana Rush, who is Assistant Professor of Clinical Psychiatry at the Institute for Juvenile Research here at UIC. Dr. Rush's clinical work as a child psychologist and her community-engaged research focus on mental health promotion for families living in urban poverty, with a primary interest in immigrant origin families, makes her an excellent contributor to discuss how undocumented status can affect mental health and well-being. Without further ado, Dr. Rush.
Hi, everyone. So you just can't pull the researcher out of me. So I have some slides. I'm going to try to go through them very quickly, but it's a quick overview on what we know about undocumented status and how it affects mental health and well-being. So I first want to I'm sure a lot of you already know this, just want to set the stage when we think about the overall immigrant population in the U.S. About 2/3 of the immigrant population resides in kind of typical gateway states, Illinois being one of them. In Illinois, 1 in 7 people are an immigrant, so it makes up about 14% of our state population here. We have about 18 million children under the age of 18 that have an immigrant parent. So as a child psychologist, this is a pretty important topic for me. 88% of them are actually US born. When we think about the population with undocumented status, 2012 estimates revealed about 11 million undocumented immigrants living in the US. In Illinois, we have an estimate around 511,000, or about 4% of our state population, 36% of which reside in Chicago. So when we think about, again, children in our K through 12 educational system, we have about 4 million who have at least one undocumented parent. Again, the majority of these youth are US born. However, we also know that 2016 statistics indicate that there were about 2 million DACA eligible young adults in the US. In Illinois, we had about 96,000 who are DACA eligible. This does not include those who would have been eligible due to age requirements, would have kind of evolved into being eligible for DACA. And so you see on this map on the right, those states that are in the darker green. It's not surprising that those that had the most DACA applicants and DACA eligible are also those who have the largest number of immigrants in their state population. So this is a very busy slide, but I put it up here just to recognize, and we talk about mental health, particularly when we talk about mental health in immigrant origin populations, we have to think about the context of migration. So oftentimes we're very focused on the post-migration experiences. So once you're here in the US, what's life like? But we want to kind of broaden this to think about what happens before you leave your country of origin, what happens during flight or during migration, how that kind of sets the stage for your overall adjustment here in the US. And I'm going to expand a little bit today on what we know about undocumented status. You'll see that that's just one of the many factors I have listed on that right-hand side of the slide. So we do know from the literature that undocumented status predicts poor health outcomes. Oftentimes this is due to not having a usual source of care, or when you do have a source of care, oftentimes having more negative experiences or interactions with formal sectors of care or social services. increased mistrust with formal sectors of care, and this kind of fear of, well, what will happen if I seek care and my status is revealed, or the status of someone in my family. And the literature shows that fear of deportation is actually emerging as a very unique and significant predictor of stress, above and beyond other predictors like language proficiency, separation from family members. And we do see that this is particularly salient for undocumented males. Of note, this study also found, I forget what the percentage was, I think it was 38%, let me get this right, because this is really noteworthy. 32% of those who are documented reported avoiding of activity due to fear of deportation. So this is not something that only affects our undocumented members of our community. When we think about access barriers, again, as a child psychologist, I think a lot about, well, how kids get into care. So we think about insurance status, and we also think about undocumented status as really contributing to longstanding mental health disparities in our country. And this holds true for those who are undocumented, but also US citizen children who have undocumented parents. So when we think about the literature, there's probably, I would say, over the last 6, 7, maybe up to 10 years, we've seen a growing literature, mostly out of the sociological literature, on the developmental trajectories of youth with undocumented status and how this affects your social, emotional, educational development. And so I highlighted, I know it's really small, you can't really see it, but I highlighted some key readings here for folks to read a little bit more on it, but I want to highlight a few key points. So about 65,000 students every year graduate from US high schools who have undocumented status. And so we reflect often on either the unpreparedness or the inequality in educational experiences for youth with undocumented status who are kind of rising into our higher ed institutions. The literatures really highlight narratives that talk about kind of growing up in the shadows, experiences of marginalization, the key pieces that students rely on others for social support and linking to resources. And also the unintended negative consequences of this kind of propagated dreamer narrative. And we can talk a little bit more about that in the Q&A. But overall, there's a large literature that suggests that the transitions to adulthood for these youth have been marked with many mental health concerns. And so I would be remiss if I didn't add that when we think about mental health and wellness, it doesn't occur in a vacuum, and we are currently in a very harsh socio-political climate that really does affect how people think about mental health, how they can become civically engaged. We have an increased kind of fear of, for example, the expansion of ICE and what that might mean for the notion of sanctuary and safety. And this is obviously having a large impact on kind of levels of distress, both with among those with undocumented status, but those who are closely affected by these policies. And so I want to just end on, this is interesting because this is a slide I oftentimes use with clinicians or those who are mental health providers or social service providers, but I think it really applies across the board. What do we do now? Stay informed. You don't know what you don't know. Don't make promises you can't keep. This is a really changing landscape, so seek out consultation and resources, and particularly knowing the importance of legal resources, and Benito will talk a little bit more about that. Learn about state and local advocacy efforts so you can either stay more informed yourself, but also kind of put the national discourse in perspective and really understand the landscape a little bit more. There's an intersectionality on marginalized groups here that we want to recognize so that we as an institution and members of the UIC community can model tolerance and inclusion. Words matter, so choose your language carefully. And also for all of us, practice self-care. This is oftentimes a difficult topic to talk about, so know when you need to seek help or when you are out of your comfort zone and you need some guidance, and building social support networks within your departments, your work units, within your classrooms, within our UIC community and our community at large. And towards that end, I have on the back table a list of some resources. The first set of resources are a curated list of mental health resources, so where to go for mental health providers, but also where to go for community trainings, events that are more specified around mental health, but also legal resources, social awareness campaigns, ways to get involved in local advocacy efforts. So please pick up that on your way out. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rush. I should say that we will be we will be opening the floor up for questions after all of our presenters. Our presenters will be presenting for between 5 and 10 minutes. So please use the 3x5 cards that are at your chair, or feel free in the audience to raise your hand once we open for Q&A. I'd like to move along here and introduce one of our newest members of the UIC community. It's an honor to introduce our next panelist. And Ms. Bonita Huang Cho is speaking to us today about legal issues. And she is a partner at the law offices of Chang, Cho, and Yi, where she specialized in immigration law for the last 22 years. She is also an extra help legal assistant legal counsel for UIC, where she assists students with immigration matters. Currently, she is on the board of directors for the Asian American Bar Association Law Foundation, and she is president of the board of directors for Cornerstone Counseling Center of Chicago. Ms. Cho is here today to talk with us about legal issues, and I would like to invite her up.
Oh, thank you. That was a little tricky. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. I'm excited to be here today, to have the chance to talk to all of you about what we can do moving forward from here. We all know that DACA is nearing its end, but the question is, what do we do? Where do we go from here? And if you know someone who's a DACA recipient, or someone who's undocumented, or maybe a family friend, I mean, it's more likely than not that you do know someone who's in this situation. I would say that you would want to tell them the first thing to do is to seek out a legal consultation. So the first thing to do is to find someone who you can talk to about the case. A lot of people like to do their own research these days on the internet to find out information, and I think that's a good starting point, but everybody's case is different. I have people come into my office all the time and say, well, my case is exactly like my cousin's case, or I talk to somebody and they have the exact same facts, and this is what they did, and they said this is what their options are, but I can assure you that everybody's case is different. There are always facts that can change, and even something that may not seem significant will make a difference in deciding whether or not somebody has a option to legalize their status. So I think the hard part, though, is that a lot of people are afraid. So it's really important to try to encourage people to seek someone out. It's not going to help to just stick your head in the sand and just not know. So that first step would be definitely to seek out an immigration attorney, and definitely an immigration attorney would be helpful. Real estate attorneys are not that helpful. Personal injury attorneys are not that helpful. Immigration is a very specialized area of law. Some people have even described it, a federal court judge described it as like a labyrinth of different statutes and regulations and memos, and it can be very confusing. And so it requires somebody that has expertise in that area. So definitely meeting an immigration attorney and talking to them, and they've got to know everything. They've got to know your entire immigration history, how you came into the U.S. makes a difference, what your family background is, what your educational background is. Did your parents ever file any paperwork? Those are all relevant issues that could make a difference as to whether or not someone may be eligible to legalize their status, even though DACA is ending now. Just to give you some examples of, I have a couple DACA clients who have been able to legalize their status. So, for instance, I have one client who, she's a Pakistani citizen, came here at a very young age, but she studied hard and she got her RN license. She's a registered nurse, and she's been sponsored by a physician's office. And so now we just went to her interview yesterday with her husband, who's also out of status, and their U.S. citizen daughter. And more likely than not, she should be getting her green card sometime in the next couple weeks. So it's possible that even though DACA is ending, she's an example of someone who is still able to legalize her status here in the United States. I have another client too, a Korean citizen. She came when she was really young, came in without a visa, and what ended up happening is her mom also came in, and she remarried a U.S. citizen. And so it ended up that because she got DACA and she got an advanced parole travel document, she was later eligible to adjust her status and get a green card through her stepfather who sponsored her. So she's been a permanent resident for a number of years now. I think she's actually at a study abroad program in Italy right now. So there are still opportunities for people who are out of status to legalize their status. It may be possible, though, that, someone may come in and talk to an attorney and find out that, it looks like there are not any options or opportunities at this time. But that's okay, too. I think knowledge is power. The DACA recipient or undocumented person needs to know and have the information and know what is possible, what isn't possible. But I also like to remind them, too, that, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. You just have to kind of take things one step at a time. Though there might not be something available now, who knows, maybe in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, there might be something else that comes along. The next point I want to make is that it's important for DACA recipients or undocumented people to make sure that they know what their rights are, know what their legal rights are. There is still due process in the U.S., though some people may not believe it. I think it is helpful for people to know that even if you don't have lawful status, it's not they can't just pick you up on off the street and put you on the next plane out of the country. You do have due process rights. If you've never had a chance to go in front of an immigration judge, you do have that opportunity. So it's important for people to know that if, God forbid, something happens and they get picked up, that they should voice their desire to have a chance to go in front of an immigration judge and have the chance to show why they may be eligible to stay here in the United States. Something that's important to know is that the immigration court process is very backlogged right now. So it's taking years for people to go through the process. So, even though something, like I said before, something may not be available for someone right now, a couple years down the road, maybe 3 years, 4 years from now, we might have a different administration in power. Who knows? We can still hope that maybe comprehensive immigration reform will still sometime come back for us, to us. Unfortunately, sometimes what happens is that if someone encounters ICE or something like that, they sometimes try to do some scare tactics. They'll tell people that, well, it's going to be months. You have to stay in jail before you get a chance to go in front of a judge. That's not true. Usually most people are eligible for bond and able to be bonded out. And then once they get out, they can wait outside for their immigration court proceedings to go through. But again, every case is different, but again, it's important to talk to somebody who has expertise and knowledge. So, that's why I'm here. That's why everybody at the Student Legal Services is there, is try to help students to find out what their options are and what opportunities they might have available to them. In case you might be interested, I have left on the table in the back a little cheat sheet that the ACLU has on their website. It's kind of a Know Your Rights cheat sheet that kind of lets you know what to do in case the police or immigration or someone comes to your door, what you can possibly say, what you can do, what your rights are. So if you think that you know someone that might be interested in that, or for your own information, please take a copy off the back table. And I think I'll just end with this, is that I tell my clients all the time that immigration is a marathon, it's not a sprint. So even though there may not be something available right now, like I said, sometimes it may take years before something is available, but the point is not to try to worry about what am I going to do, 5 years from now. We just have to take things one day at a time and then go from there. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we'd like to move on to our student perspective. So it is an honor to actually introduce to you one of our most excuse our other panelists for me saying this, but are one of our most important perspectives today. And I'd like to introduce Ms. Catalina Restrepo, who is an undergraduate in our College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. Ms. Restrepo is a member of one of our most active student groups at UIC, the Fearless Undocumented Alliance, and she's here today to talk to us from a student perspective and discuss how we as UIC community members can be more responsive to student needs. And Catalina, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me if I talk here? No. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. Well, first and foremost, I also want to say thank you for everybody who's here. You being here really is significant, or it means a lot to me, because you're taking the time out of your busy schedules of being students, professors, staff, grading papers, or studying for an exam, to listen to all of us here and to know the struggles that students who have DACA or undocumented are facing or can eventually face after March. So thank you. The day that DACA was rescinded, it felt like a funeral. I came to campus and I was with my fellow peers who are also either allies or had DACA, and it just felt dark. It was sunny, but it felt dark, and we didn't know how to respond to the verbiage that was utilized when they rescinded it, and we didn't know how to respond to our future. Some of my friends didn't go to class because they couldn't handle going to their criminal law class, talking about law but knowing that something was taken away from them. Or they couldn't really emotionally handle being in class and learning about a subject that they won't remember after that class because they were too busy figuring out what they're going to do about their future. So it's really important that for professors to consider that students who are DACA or undocumented face significant levels of struggle on top of being students and on top of normal life situations. We're not just focused on our grades or studying for an exam or writing a paper, but we're also worried about if my mom got deported or if my mom got in got stopped and a cop asked for her documents or whatever. Like, we're worried about that. We're worried about their deportation. We're worried, well, how am I going to pay for school after my DACA expires? So for example, I work to pay for my tuition. I come to school 2 times a week, and then I go to work 3 times in the week. And that's how I make enough to pay for my tuition. And I'm not the only one who does that. So a lot of us are fearing, what are we going to do when DACA is rescinded, when our work authorization ends? How are we going to pay for school? How are we going to accomplish the dreams that we want to accomplish, like being professionals? And how do we get there when we don't know? And I've always said it feels like being DACA and being undocumented always feels like we're in a limbo. We don't know what the future holds. We just have to take it a day at a time. And sometimes that can be very frustrating, and it can be very, it can make us, what's the word? It can really make us doubt what we can do because we don't know if we'll be able to get there. So sometimes, and especially last semester, I started to think, what's the point of all this if I'm not going to get the job I want? What's the point of studying till 1 a.m. if I'll graduate and I won't be able to continue paying for a master's degree if I want to get that or get a job that I want? And so it's really important to recognize that. And it's also very important to recognize that our securities are not stable, or our security isn't stable, especially now, especially for those whose work authorization expires after March. That's the constant narrative. What are we going to do? So, as a student, I would like to suggest to staff and professors and students as well to start your spring semester talking about this issue, to let your students know, I'm here for you if you need anything. I'm here to support you. If I don't know how to support you, I'll find the resources that can do that. In fact, I had a professor do that the day DACA was rescinded. I was able to go to class, and the 3rd class, the professor said, spent the first 5 minutes of class talking about how he's here to support us, but he didn't know how, so he's going to find out resources. The next day, he came back and had a full resources, even wrote a PDF document and put it on his Blackboard account for us to see and have access to. Little did he know that there was at least 2 DACA recipients in his classroom of 150 students. So that it makes a difference, because after that I was able to approach him to encourage him to go to these events, that if a student approached him, what their resources were. So I would just really encourage professors to include that, whether it be in their syllabus or in the beginning of their classes, especially with next semester being March is around the corner. We don't know what students might have in front of them or have to face, and being understanding that it's really, really difficult to manage all of these stresses, but also writing like an essay or studying for an exam or a midterm on top of fearing for our future, fearing for our family's safety. But for us, and I know for me, it's important to know that we're supported, and you being here makes me feel happy, because a lot of individuals may not know what DACA is, or may not understand how important this is, or understand the importance of not just having DACA, but having something beyond that, right? To that can impact more individuals. And that's really significant for me. So, yes.
Thank you, Catalina, for providing us with that valuable perspective. Our next presenters are 2 presenters, our panelists, and they're going to be providing us with some information on how to address faculty addressing being responsive to students. So how can faculty be responsive to students and addressing concerns in the classroom? So Dr. Amalia Payares is a professor of political science and Latin American and Latino studies, and the director of the Latin American and Latino studies program at the university here. She has written extensively on social movements in Latin America and immigrant rights activism in the US. Her latest book, Faculty Activism, Immigrant Struggles, and the Politics of Non-Citizenship, focuses on the undocumented immigrant activism in Chicago. Dr. Joseph Hermes is currently the director of the Counseling Center here at UIC. He is a licensed clinical psychologist in Illinois with a career that has focused on university and college mental health and wellness services. He has previously served as director of counseling centers and as associate dean for wellness programs, among other administrative training and clinical positions at universities and medical settings in the Chicago area. Dr. Payares, Dr. Hermes?
Thank you, Joey.
Thanks, Joey.
So just one clarification, my book is family activism, not faculty activism.
Sorry, did I say family?
Yeah, that's okay. I engage in faculty activism, but I don't write about it, so that would be too much. So anyhow, so welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here, and thanks again, Catalina, and all the panelists. I want to talk a little bit about being a faculty member or a staff member, and how to kind of approach and think about this. And I say this because I've had many questions from faculty, some questions from staff, people who say, well, I don't know anything about DACA, or people who actually ask me, well, I can't talk about it because, wouldn't that be problematic that I talk about it? If somebody's not out and then I talk about it. So part of what happens is this fear leads people to not mention it at all. And then sometimes students feel like, well, it's like it didn't even happen, right? Like here I'm going through this trauma and it's like nobody seems to care, right? So what I want to say is that there's no one right way. I mean, I think the one right thing I would say to do is to communicate in some capacity, but it doesn't mean, if you feel like not very familiar with it, or you feel like you don't want to really get into it at great length in the classroom, like some faculty may, like their teaching content, the substance of what they're doing may be connected to this, so for us it could be easier. But if you're a professor of physics or you may feel like this isn't really something that, we should be spending a lot of class time with, right? There are ways in which to spend at least some time talking about it, just mentioning it, just like Catalina's professor did. and then maybe sharing online resources, but also making yourself open to if your family or you have someone in your family or community or you're affected, no need to kind of ask anybody about their status, but just say, come to my office hours and we can talk about it, right? So there are ways in which you can reach out and make yourself available, right? And then when a person comes in to talk to you about it, right, the great thing is, even if you don't know a lot about this, we are at UIC, or we have a lot of resources. And we have places, and Tanya, who's speaking after Joe, will be talking about the resources where you can find out information, but resources also in terms of people, right? So if, for example, it's something connected to sort of needing legal support, they could go to legal services and meet Benita. If it's something that is connected to some other aspect, something else they need for their family, they could go to Tanya. If it's if you feel like the student would benefit from counseling, you can advise that they recommend that they do that, and Joe will talk about that. But I think that you need to kind of be able to educate yourself a little bit, so that if that happens and a student does come to your office hours, or if you want to share the resources through a PDF. I would say there's 3 main things when I have a student come to my office or talk to me about it. One is to think about, is there any short-term need? Is there something right now that they need right now? And is it something I can do, or I can get them to somebody who can help them? So for example, I had a student last year. I actually had 2 or 3 students who needed to become guardians of their siblings in case their parent got deported. And so the student's like, I really need like a workshop on guardianship. I needed to be in Spanish. I needed to be close to where my parents live, because we don't have a car. So because I am networked myself, I went in and called people and emailed, and finally found one precisely in Brighton Park where they needed one, right? And was able to email her this information. But there are the people campus, there's our task force, there's Tania Cabrera here at the end, who could do something like that. So if you can't do the legwork, you can support the student. The second question is like, what are their long-term issues, and also issues that may be impacting their performance in this class? And I think this is important, because what faculty often don't know is that there are resources if a student has to drop out, if a student has to be gone for a while. There are there are things that the registrar's office can do. There are ways in which this could be done, but they're not openly publicized, right? But if a student's in a crisis, and depending on what they have to do, we can work on that. There are also funds if a student can't finish paying for their and Joey can talk about more about those. If a student is near graduation and can't finish paying, okay, there are also resources. We have just started a fund in the Office of Diversity that is designed for precisely to support students who are facing immigration issues, okay? We still have to fundraise a lot, but there are ways in which we're trying. Okay, and we can definitely get your support. If you want to donate to that fund, come to me and tell me about it. So we have long-term. So think about the long-term issues. And the third thing I would say is the student networked. It's the student networked, because if a student says to them, "Oh, I'm a member of the Fearless Undocumented Alliance," then I go, okay, this student is networked, right? Or I've been talking to Tania Cabrera, who's going to be talking at the end as our undocumented advisor. I say, oh, the student obviously has the resources, but the student may not be. We have many undocumented students here who may not be in connection with any organization, and so then the issue is like then you know that you do need to provide them more of these resources because they're not networked. And the last thing I would like to say is that there are other ways to support that include not only advocacy towards the state, federal advocacy and state advocacy, and Tanya will talk about the student access bill, which I'm very involved with that. And so if we are able to get that bill passed, we will be able, public universities will be able to offer scholarships and tuition waivers to undocumented students, meaning render them eligible for it. They're not eligible for any federal funds, but some states do allow them to be eligible for state funds, and that would be a game changer. But we've been working on that bill for 4 years, so that's an example of something you can engage in advocacy for. But also, even if you don't have time to do that or don't want to do that, think about your own units. Think about your own, place in UIC? Well, we have this task force to deal with these general issues, and I think that the work at the general level of the campus has been very productive, and at least a couple people on this panel are here because of the long-term advocacy that has happened for the rights of undocumented students, I would say, for the last 8 years or so. But in your unit, for example, oftentimes undocumented students have a lot of issues with like business processes, because business-related units don't necessarily think about undocumented students when they create policies, right? So undocumented students sometimes have to take extraordinary steps just to get, paid a DACA student to do a job or something. So we have those kind of issues. We have gone through years of getting, the scholarships that are supported at UIC and through work with the foundation to make sure that most of them are available to non-citizens, right? So think about what my unit can do in order to improve the experience for undocumented students. And also, if you are with daily interaction with students, Tanya Gabriela also offers a training that she'll talk to you about. If you feel like your staff and faculty in your unit could benefit from this and could be more supportive of students, you could also ask for support with that. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Tanya. Hi. One of the questions I thought we could try to address just even briefly is, so what do college students who are DACA or undocumented look like? What are their concerns? What are some of their characteristics that we know about? And we heard some about that as far as the population that is coming to college. And so I'm just coming from a national conference of counseling center directors from across the country. And so one of the things that we talked about is that a study that came out in 2015 that really spoke to some of what we've heard from Dana and also from you as a student about the real concerns that students face. And this was a study of nearly 1,000 students nationally who are undocumented here in the United States, and 70% of those students identified as being first generation. So I wanted to sort of put some of these pieces out for us to think about that in your role as faculty and staff, and also about the students themselves for what their needs might be given some of those characteristics. So most of them tend to be first generation students. 3/4, 75% talked and reported that they are concerned about deportation and detainment, either for themselves or family members. So it is a very active and present concern for them as they're trying to go about focusing on their academic work and demands. There's also some other pieces. 73%, as we heard right here from you, are working, trying to afford and manage their education through work in some type of employment. So then these changes make a difference. The environment that some of these students face, and most of them do, is I think part of it I think of as a series of doors. I haven't changed who I am, I haven't changed my behavior, and a door that I could open every day and feel welcomed to with a hand extended in a welcoming environment, or at least potentially so, suddenly the next day I walk over and that door doesn't open anymore. Or when I open that door, it may be a trap, it may be a place that is no longer safe for me. And the environment suddenly has shifted in a way that it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me, or has now become a threat when once it was perhaps more welcoming. So one of the pieces for me is, how do we make sure that each of us, faculty and staff and students, are contributing to UIC being a safe space? If you didn't see it, I'd recommend at least knowing about it, which is the video that was done. It's a minute. It's on a website that the Dean of Students Office has available called You and I Care. And it's a message from the campus saying, you're welcome here. And I think part of this, how do we, in a real way, every day, try and deliver that same message? Is my classroom a safe space? Is my hours of conversation available to students for office hours a place where a student could come and express to me some of the concerns that they have? I like what Tanya said about, you don't have to have all of the information at hand. You do know, and we do trainings, and if you want that from us, contact the Counseling Center, or Tanya's another good resource for that as well, about how to help distressed students. Those things still apply. Your knowledge base may be limited about some of the other pieces here. Get educated. I think you're here trying to do that. You're listening to us trying to do that. Use that knowledge, but if you don't have it fully at hand, don't believe or think that you're somehow not as available to help students who are in distress. You know about how to try and do that. You know about how trying to be empathic. You know about trying to be responsive to what the student's needs might be. Continue to have some faith and some confidence in your ability and your interest in doing so. And then inform yourself with other information as you're hearing about, say, from this panel, or some of the resources that we're telling you about. one of the pieces for me about undocumented students and the status as first generation is that these are students coming to a college environment who have very little family resource and knowledge about what a campus environment may be like. They may have been functioning in their families as the spokesperson for that family with regard to health care or other kinds of activities. And so that student necessarily doesn't know about or have a family system that knows about resources available on a college campus. So they're not going to be as accessible to those kinds of things as other students who know about the college environment may be. Clearly that's the case for our students here. We have a good sampling of first-generation students, and certainly within our undocumented student population that's true. Part of that too then is functioning as spokespersons. They are kind of in some ways leaders without power. They have, as children perhaps, or in these adolescent spaces, been responsible to try and provide leadership for the family, but don't really have the power. Their parents themselves, immigrant parents, may not have been available to be as knowledgeable or able to help their students respond to their children's needs. And so these are individuals who aren't necessarily used to reaching out, identifying themselves as having needs, and then seeking resources. So as faculty, staff, and others who are trying to provide support, being knowledgeable about or sensitive to the fact that you may need to kind of reach out to be even more forthright in your availability or willingness to help, and to be very explicit about that with students who may be struggling in your class. Because they may kind of have a sense of being invisible, of remaining invisible, and there's been some important adaptation for being in that position. But when it comes to help or getting help, it's important to then try and step past or understand that these are students who may not be able to or don't know how to ask for help, or feel that it's not okay to ask for that help. There may be cultural factors which say, you know, if you're needing some kind of mental health support, that's a real stigmatizing endeavor. And I think if there's a message to say what you're responding to, the distress you have, the anxiety, the uncertainty about your future, are understandable in the context and the environment in which we're in. So it's not that you have some kind of mental health disorder or mental illness that you're having these responses, that you're struggling, but this is a very understandable response and reaction to the kind of environment and context that you're finding yourself in. And I think if we can deliver that message and still say we're here for you, you're welcome here, I think that's an important piece to do. The other part that I hear as we talk is a concern about, in some ways, deficits and negative impacts on our undocumented and DACA students. And I think it's important in the context in which you're teaching, in which you're engaging the students, to also recognize that these are students who bring significant assets to the college campus because of those leadership roles within their families, those spokespersons that they've become or had to be, because of their commitment and activity and the causes that are important to them. We have a shining example of a student like that right here. It's important to recognize that it's not just deficit, negativity, and stress, but that they bring assets to this campus, and to celebrate those, to recognize those, and to speak to those when someone is feeling uncertain about their future or struggling to meet their academic demands, that we can remind them also of those assets as part of their own resilience, and use that as a way to kind of further access services for them, to help them continue to be confident in the skills that they have developed and have available, and to utilize to control what they can, to let go of what they may not be able to control, but not to give up and not to be overwhelmed with anxiety. And I think we can facilitate that process in ways that you already know how and can receive additional training on if you need that from us. Okay? I'll stop there.
Thank you. So it's an honor to introduce our final panelist, Ms. Tanya Cabrera. Tanya is our Associate Director of Equity and Inclusion in the Office of the Vice Provost for Diversity. In 2011, Tanya was appointed by former Governor Quinn, and in 2016 by current Governor Rauner, to serve as the chairperson for the Illinois Dream Fund Commission. Tanya feels that's a role that will set the platform for educational access and degree attainment for undocumented students in Illinois and across the U.S. She's previously worked under the Vice Provost at IIT, the Illinois Institute of Technology, as the Associate Director for Minority Outreach and Undocumented Students before joining UIC in the summer of 2016. Tanya's here today to talk with us about challenges our students face on campus and resources, as some of our panelists have noted. Tanya, please.
Thank you, Joy. I want to give a shout out and big thanks to both Joy and Amalia and everybody here on the panel who've really been my go-to people, as Joy is and Amalia, and under the leadership of Sharu, I've been able to do a lot of this work. So thank you to each of you here and those of you present who are coming here to gain this information. As Mr. Hermes said, I am willing to come and do trainings. I've been doing some trainings with different departments, even in the evenings. I don't live too far from UIC, so I'm able to come into the evenings and do some night classes, which I've been doing for the last couple weeks. You can contact directly via email or at my office line. Whenever I'm out of the office, my calls are forwarded to my cell. I feel like under the current political climate, I have to be available 24/7 to make sure if a student contacts me that I'm available and that I don't miss them. Because sometimes, as you know, students will call like, oh, I called, her voicemail's full. I'm not going to call her back. Well, at least I have that access to kind of call them back and engage with them. The counseling services, I really want students to make sure that they understand that there's resources available here for them, that they can come to the counseling services at the Student Center at SSB under Joe's office and schedule an appointment. I'm not sure if there's services also available on the West Campus for our students. Yeah?
Yes.
Oh, we could do that too? Okay, good. But we want to make sure that students are taking advantage of this. A lot of the students that I meet with, I try to meet with all the students individually to have a conversation, to gauge what their needs are, what resources that they need today, kind of hear them talk. I like to take them out to eat. I know that food is very important to all of us, especially after right now. After this meeting. But I feel it's one of the statistics says that if you break bread with somebody, they're more comfortable to open up to you, and that's been the case with a lot of students. And I also want to feed them because I feel like coffee and granola doesn't work all the time. But it's also important that when I work with these students that I understand that they're all processing this information differently. Those students who want to be in the back of the room, others who want to be in the front of the room and be active, and I have to be respectful of their space and how they're processing this information. And Joe and Dana have really been essential in providing that insight to us and making sure that we watch out for these cases. So even in my role, getting training from other colleagues is very important to me. Their contact information, and like Joe said, please visit the website of the Counseling Center, and please encourage your students to visit them, schedule an appointment. There's also services available after hours. To students on campus that they could receive. If they need to talk to somebody, they can make a call. There's a hotline for services that's available throughout the weekend to get that information. One of the big issues that I am not a lawyer, so I'm extremely thankful that for Benita and Ted, thank you, Linda, for the appointment, for Benita to have us here so that students can now have someone to go to talk specifically about their immigration issues. And I approached by a student who said that, hey, I'm a citizen, but my parents are undocumented. Can I still utilize these services? Absolutely. So we want to make sure that it's not just for undocumented students, but for those students whose families are directly impacted by the socio-political climate that we're in right now. And the contact information, I know it's a direct line for legal services, but I encourage students to, now that we have Benita here as well as Ted, that they stop and make an appointment and have that conversation of what they can or what they're eligible to do. The current state legislation that Dr. Bayatis mentioned with the student access bill in a veto session right now is something that we're looking to do. This bill, the biggest financial strain for our students and meeting with them is the financial strain of how to, and that's everybody. How am I going to pay for school? It's a lot harder for undocumented immigrants to navigate this process because unfortunately they're not eligible for state or federal aid. Private scholarships are very hard to come by. Institutional scholarships, very competitive and limited in the amount to cover tuitions $7,000 and beyond. So this bill would allow undocumented students access to four-year public institutions like UIC to get tuition waivers, compete for funding for these opportunities, and really, my biggest thing is that I want these students to live a normal life, to be able to engage and not live within fear and just be a student, to enjoy life as is and pursue their dreams. So this is a bill that will help make a huge difference to our students and to students, hopefully set the platform for other states to adopt the legislation that this bill will access. A lot of questions came out of what happens if ICE comes on campus. And we know that they do come on campus. We do have international students, and by law, they have to come in and speak to our International Services Office. But we control how they come into the institution, right? So we will only take a judicial warrant. signed by a judge, not anything from ICE mandating that they could come on our campus or visit a student. Should an ICE agent come to your classroom, or if you see them visible on campus, you can contact directly. The first response is the UIC police, and I left their contact information here. But this is our first responders. You do not have to engage. You do not have to let them into your classroom. You can say, please hold on, I'm going to contact UIC police. These are the people who you need to talk to directly. Okay, and they have, so they should be quick to respond and join you at your classroom or wherever you may be on campus. We have some resources in the back. After election, Jennifer Juarez and Joey Volpe came together to work on a 5x7 card with administration to give internal and external resources, not only here at UIC, but in the surrounding communities that our students come from. And those are in the back, and we also have business cards that you could scan the barcode there and get the information uploaded to your phone, so you could share it with students. I know you want all the UIC apps, right? I also put some information for Legal Resource Center. Immigration Legal Resource Center has some updated resources, printouts that you could use, posters to post up. The Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, who we've partnered with on the Student Access Bill and some other bills, does a lot of policy work. So it'd be good to get information from them. They also host webinars, information. Next Tuesday, we'll be at Cross Campus at Rush for the ICER Symposium, which Dana and I will be presenting on for resources for undocumented students. And as Dana mentioned, the Coalition for Immigrant Mental Health, they do a workshop that is extremely helpful for me. They have workshops throughout the day and even in the evening with practitioners who talk about how they can support students. I was very impressed with the 3 people who were presenting on this panel, and it was very informative. And I know it's difficult to leave the institution, but if you have the opportunity to engage in one of their trainings, it's well worth it. Questions? Again, I just want to say thank you. I'm a year into this position, a little over a year, but it's work that I love, very passionate about. And I'm really thankful that UIC is setting the platform for other institutions to follow, to provide this type of support, not only at the public level, but at the private level. So I'm thankful for UIC and the administration for recognizing these students and providing the resources necessary under the current climate. Thank you.
I'd like to invite Charu Takral back up here. We're going to be moving into our segment for questions and answers.
Thank you. Thanks again to all of our phenomenal panelists today for all of the information that you shared, all of the information you've left in the back. For those of you that are not here to get physical copies, we'll find a way to get those scanned, put them on our website, and we're trying to create an area and space on the current dream.uic.edu website where everything can be accessed, more than you can even imagine. It's growing by the day. So please check that out. Another point that I want to emphasize before we jump into any questions from the audience members is Amalia mentioned this briefly, that we recently had a Diversity Emergency Student Assistance Fund created to respond and help support these students that are directly impacted. I'd like to highlight that right now we don't have a link set up. We literally have this developed and created overnight from a team of folks here at UIC in response to this issue. That doesn't mean that it's not open for funding. So I do want to reiterate, if you want to offer any funding or contribute to this fund, just call me. Call me or the director of, or the leadership of the advancement unit, Jeff Nierhoff. And we will give you specifics on how we can make sure that funding is appropriately sort of routed to that fund. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear. So at this time, we have a floatable mic, and we also have index cards. So if there are folks that want to raise any questions here, we have Kelsey in the back that has the microphone. And so please do let us know by raising your hands if you'd like to ask any questions at this time.
Hi, I'm Walter Pedrajic. I teach at the Department of Communication. This is a very innocent question. Have there been any visits to classrooms saying we need to come in and wear ICE and we need to check something out? Because I know I, as someone conducting a class, would be, go away, come back at the end of the period or whatever. But I'm just wondering, has that actually happened recently? And then I have a follow-up question that's unconnected to that.
Sure. No, not since the election time. It's something that we've been monitoring with UIC Police, but not now. It hasn't happened. In the past, I'm not sure, but over this course of this year, no.
I mean, I think something that happened last year is that somebody saw an ICE truck or van, and students were very nervous about it, and we heard about it, but I think it was part of a career fair. So those are also issues that, even that presence can cause, a lot of concern.
And then my other more practical or immediate question is, we had to all take a Illinois ethics test, and they're very firm about not being involved in political, that is, advocacy of candidates and parties and such. So you were mentioning lobbying for this legislation and such. Where does all this fit into the, technically, are we allowed to do that? Or by doing this, are we somehow involved in an advocacy process? Not that it's going to stop me from doing what I'm going to do, but I'm just curious.
That's a great question. Amalia has had that question before, so.
Well, I'm a co-chair of the Student Access Bill Task Force. Let me say this bill was actually created by a task force that was started at UIC with former President Easter and then Provost Alon Kaufman very much supporting the bill. So UIC government, the U of I, Government and Public Relations, they very much helped write the bill, and they support it. So it is a kind of UIC-led, but U of I bill, and all the 9 public universities in Illinois support it because it's basically giving universities autonomy to make all their students eligible for scholarships. But the rules about ethics still apply, right? We're not doing this we're not advocating in the name of the university per se, but there are sort of ways in which people can do this as individuals, right? Mm-hmm.
I think there's another response to that question, Joey.
Yeah.
Hi. So as a staff member, I think Amalia can speak to this as a faculty member. As a staff member, I would actually echo the same thing. However, one of the things to remember is that we can do this. When we do make calls to legislators, we are supposed to do that on our own time. We are supposed to do that on our own personal devices. So that's something to remember. It's very important to take personal time if you are doing so and adhering. And one of the most important things is to always ask at the Ethics Commission. You can talk to our own university liaisons for that. We've asked. So we made a very clear and concerted effort with the Access Bill, of which I'm part of. One of the other things to know is, just to give you a sense of this, we are subject matter experts in our fields, as you are, right? So faculty, and so it's an interesting thing. I just want to give you a vignette. So I have served as a subject matter expert at the state in relation to the Student Access Bill. And that's something that I want to encourage our staff and faculty to understand, is that we are subject matter experts at times. We are not representing the institution. We are representing the subject matter for which we've been asked to testify. So I know that this does cause a lot of consternation. So I hope that's helpful. And we really do. And if you are not sure who to ask about this, I would offer that you can go through either the Office of Diversity or even my office, and we will connect you to the right people to ask those questions if you have a question. The most important thing is to know when you're clear about what you can and can't do. So I appreciate your question, and I hope that's helpful.
Okay, thank you, Joey. I saw a few other hands over on that side of the room for questions or comments. Any other last remarks or thoughts that you want to share on the panel?
I just wanted to add a comment about, as kind of a follow-up to the statement about invisibility for some of the students that we're speaking about and on behalf of. And that is the opportunity for students also to pursue services that are anonymous, and that can also be an important resource to be aware of. The Counseling Center recently added a mental health screening opportunity for students at our website where they can go and kind of check in and take certain kinds of validated measures to find out how are they functioning. And then there's some recommendations made based on that scoring about services and then information about services on campus that may be appropriate to their particular concern. I think part of that is to also appreciate that the idea of where am I safe to really talk about my personal concerns. Is that the office of the faculty or staff member that I'm addressing or speaking to? There may be real limits there. And the reality of where there may be spaces on campus or are spaces on campus where confidentiality is in fact hard and fast. And that at least two of those sites are represented as we sit here today, which is the Student Legal Service, of which Benita and Ted in the audience are part of, and then the Counseling Center, which I represent in our discussions today. And that's important for students to know that their status is undocumented or otherwise is really information that will not be removed or given out from the Counseling Center. Specifically, I can speak to that. And that is something that is given to them as part of their recipient of a mental health service. So that's important for them to understand that. There are limits there, and that's explained to students, and we do that with all students that would come. But their immigration status is not a piece of information that would be made available to anyone outside the Counseling Center without the student's permission. Okay.
We don't have that protection.
That's correct.
We don't have that protection.
That meaning if some student comes and talks to us, what you just described about that things can't be picked and plucked and whatever, there's confidentiality. There, as I recall, again from the ethics test, I don't think that applies if a student comes to my office and talks to me. I'm not sure.
Renee Taylor, our Vice Provost for Faculty Affairs.
Hi there. I've had a ton of trainings that we've been bombarded with, so I can see how you would get these kinds of messages. I think that's the Title IX training. It's a little bit different. It's about sexual issue.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, so if I can, I know, Renee, you weren't on mic, and since we're streaming, I'm going to say what Renee has said is ultimately there are a number of trainings, and some of the requirements that we have for Title IX reporting is very specific to Title IX. And one of the other things to remember is that we all adhere to the rules of the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. So I think this is where my office often consults with faculty, as does the Dean of Students, and Linda Deanna, if those of you who are streaming can't see me do this, but I'm looking right at her. Sorry, Linda. Our deans of students also can be really valuable help here as faculty members when students do come and talk with you, fellow faculty who work in advocacy and work with students on these things. But I definitely understand your question. I think the training for Title IX is very specific, and it can lead us to be worried about when a student wants to come and talk about something personal. What I might ask is our panelists, and maybe if I can put some of them on the spot for one question that I thought of, which is tangentially related, which is a little bit about your best advice, and this is not an easy question necessarily, your best advice about talking with students when you're not sure what their status is, right? And you may, given some detail that they give you, wonder about it, and you want to be responsive as a faculty member, Amelia, as a mental health practitioner, Dana, and in your field, we've stressed what may be resources here, but I think one of the things we didn't necessarily spend is because we've done it in other venues, spend some time on, is how we just generally, and Joe has given us some great feedback about this already, interact about that. So if you could address just your initial thoughts about how do you kind of approach these things, I think is important, because I think it speaks to the comfort level that a faculty member may have when a student wants to come and talk about something.
Okay, well, that's a good question. I mean, Joe was talking about the variety, and I also want to see if also Catalina has some ideas here. But, some students will sort of I mean, DACA has sort of made it possible also. I mean, there's a difference between pre-DACA and post-DACA, because DACA is something that has allowed a lot of students to just openly work and legally work. And so, a very common thing, maybe a student says, I'm a DACA student or something like that, right? So they're not necessarily saying I'm undocumented. It has meant a different thing since DACA. But some students don't, right? So that's what I was talking about earlier. You signal it, if you're in a classroom, you signal it by talking about your own concern and interest in this issue and supporting students who may have family members or siblings or may be impacted in any way by this issue, right? So, and again, so students may not come up to you there. They may email you, they may come to your office hours. So you just have a way of letting people come to you by talking about the issue more generally and by talking about community and family. And then you don't necessarily, I don't talk about this when a student has come to see me, I don't follow up in the classroom, right? I may email them later, but I don't mention it to them at all in the classroom.
I don't know, Catalina?
I mean, I guess you're right, where DACA did make us, at least I can speak for myself, having DACA made me feel a lot more comfortable to talk about the issue. And I've always, maybe, like I said, I can talk about myself, but I've always been someone to seek help and to seek advice. So in order to do that, I always had to disclose of my status, whether that was in high school when I didn't have DACA or whether it was in starting the university when I did have DACA. So for myself, I'm okay with disclosing, I'm okay with approaching a professor, but knowing that a professor is on my side makes it a lot more comfortable and makes it more comfortable for other students as well, for us to do that.
I would just add the following comment, which is for undocumented students, DACA status students, there may be a concern or a hesitance, given the changing environment in which they're in, to come forward when they've been victims of crime or sexual assault that was referred to as Title IX and such. And so it may be important that their status is less the issue at that moment as it is that there are resources available to them where, regardless of their status, they can receive confidential services. I've mentioned two of them. The third would be our Campus Advocacy Network, which is a relevant resource for students who may have been impacted by sexual misconduct, sexual assault and such, and domestic violence. And so to know those resources, so students who may feel it's not safe to come forward as victims of crime have, in fact, safe resources where that is not at issue for other services that may otherwise be provided. Okay.
I think some of the students, my Asian students that I've worked with, unfortunately, I meet them here at SCE, and I'll be on my phone, and they'll call me, and they'll sit in another part of the lunchroom because they don't want to self-identify. And I have my name tag on so that students say, like, oh, she works with undocumented students. Or if I'm on the elevator, I'm like getting close to somebody. But a lot of the students will not disclose their status, and they don't want to meet with me at my office or be seen. We'll do coffee at a local Starbucks or somewhere off campus, but they don't want to be identified or seen. And so I have to respect that, meeting them at spaces where they feel comfortable with, or not meeting me at all and just looking at me like, hey, I'm with the blue shirt. I'm like, oh, okay. I'm like, well, here's what you could do, right? And sharing those resources, just so whatever makes them feel safe, protected, then that is what I have to do, and that is what we have to do, right? I don't say, oh, you're undocumented, or do you have DACA? They usually come to me, and I say, well, tell me about yourself. What do you got going on? How can I help you? I was like, I'm here to listen. What do you need? What can I do for you? Are you hungry? I'm not going to give you coffee, but I got granola snacks still. But making them feel comfortable, letting them know that there's a safe space with me, with my colleagues, and just being open to have that honest conversation. The most important thing you could do is listen and be empathetic, not necessarily have pity. Oh, I'm so sorry you're going through this. Some students frown upon that, and there's other ways to say, like, okay, thank you, Tanya, but how can I help you? I want to listen. Let me know what I can do. And if I can't connect, if I don't have those resources, I'm going to connect you with Joe or someone else who can help you with what you're dealing with right now.
Were there any other questions? I do want to highlight one point that came up in response to this discussion. I know that our wonderful student offered this in her perspective about what faculty could do, in terms of just space, and it really brings to light this larger issue of inclusion in the classroom, or inclusion in the spaces that you have authority and power to have an impact in how you communicate or how you do not communicate about these issues. And one suggestion that I've often used in consulting with other units or colleges on campus around inclusive practices is putting in writing in your syllabus. You mentioned that. We do that in a lot of our dialogue courses that I co-lead with Philip Vasquez here on campus. And we have samples of dialogue syllabi that we're happy to share if that helps you with wording. That really, we've gotten quite a bit of feedback over the years from students saying, you know what, just seeing written resources on campus around diversity, culture, inclusion, access, and equity have gone a long way. Day one, presenting them with this written communication has really gone a long way for them to feel like they can approach me later as a faculty member or a professor or instructor of a course and be able to talk about issues that are sensitive, to be able to ask for help. They'll actually come to the office hours. I wanted to share that to highlight that we have a lot of opportunity and resources available when we are sort of in that power, that position of power in the classroom, to be able to set the tone for inclusion. One is through a syllabus, but we also do things, there's strategies for inclusive practices that you can look into, that you can ask about, that you can read about, that set up ground rules for communication in your classroom. That's something that we often use as a strategy, day one, again, with the syllabus. This is how communication is going to happen. This is how respectful communication is going to happen. You can disagree, and disagreeing is healthy, but here's some parameters for how this is going to happen in our classroom to make it safe for conversations. So those kinds of things, we've gotten specific feedback from students across the years as inclusive practices. Those are two of many that exist out there. And so I just encourage you to think about even doing something like that, even if the semester started, to kind of take a minute during the teaching of your next class or the work with your next students, and just talk about that inclusion piece. Talk about, I know that there's a lot happening right now in the country, nationally, internationally. I just want you to know that we want to acknowledge this has an impact on students. This has an impact on people being able to get through the day-to-day. So if you need to talk about it, here's some resources, highlighting our existing resources on campus, many of which you've heard about today. So part of, I think, what we really need to do is to highlight, communicate, and sound like a broken record about what opportunities exist on campus, so that students are constantly, I think it's a great, it's a worthwhile risk to take, in my opinion, to repeat and to communicate and to feel like you're over-communicating, rather than not taking that chance and sending a different kind of message to students. So I want to thank you all again, for those of you that have attended today, those of you that are watching us live, and those of you that have contributed to providing your expertise with campus. We're going to have a round 2 tomorrow. So we hope you join us for tomorrow on the west side. We have all of the specific information advertised on our website. We're going to be in the College of Nursing tomorrow, 3rd floor conference room. First floor conference room, College of Nursing, same time. And if you need any specific information, get in touch with Office of Diversity, and we'll get you there. Okay? Thank you so much.